All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this first meeting of, well, I'm not sure it's the first meeting, actually. I guess it's the first meeting of the 2012 Budget Committee of the Council of the Town of Oakville. And I'll call the meeting to order. Any member of the public wishing to speak further regarding any issues on the agenda for this afternoon may appear before Council at its meeting on July 4th at 7 p.m., when the recommendations from this afternoon's meeting will go forward for receipt. If you wish to speak as a delegation, please sign the sheet located at the back of the room or notify the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the Council meeting. Any PowerPoint presentations must also be forwarded to the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the meeting in order for us to arrange for the technology to be in place for your presentation. Committee, I see no regrets. Does anyone have a declaration of pecuniary interest? Thank you. You have no confidential consent items. Your first item of business is to appoint a chair. Councillor Elgar.
I would be pleased to nominate Councillor Adams.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Johnston. Is there a discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Congratulations, Councillor Adams. If congratulations are what's in order. And I will vacate the chair and turn it over to you at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. The real order of business of the day is item number 2, which is the 2012 budget directions and 2013 and 14 budget forecast. And Nancy, are you going to provide the presentation today? Okay.
Sorry, I'm just waiting for the overhead. Good afternoon. Today's meeting marks the beginning of the 2012 budget process. My presentation this afternoon will be fairly brief. I'll just provide an overview of where the 2012 budget currently sits, as well as the assumptions that we have included in the base budget and the forecasted increases for 2013 and 14, and then touch briefly on the next steps. I'll talk a little bit more about inflation further on in my presentation. However, for the base budget, we've assumed 2.5% general inflation for general expenditures, 2.7% on construction costs. Fuel costs, we've assumed 8%, and fuel has been very volatile over the past few months. We budgeted 98 cents a litre for fuel for 2011, and for the first 5 months, we've had fuel costs range from 97 cents a litre to $1.07 a litre. So we've assumed an 8% increase, and staff will be reviewing this as the budget process moves forward to determine if we require an additional adjustment. Insurance costs are in the forecast as a 9% increase, and that is based on the estimate we've received from our insurance carrier. In addition to this 9%, they have quoted us an extra 2% for the new transit facility, so that becomes an operating impact from capital. For utilities, hydro costs, we've included an inflationary increase of 3.2%. We are members of the LAS electricity program, which is part of AMO. And based on their estimates, that's the amount that we require in our base budget. As well, 2012 includes the continued phase-in of the hydro rebasing program for street lighting. As a result, that adds $352,000 to our street lighting hydro budget, bringing the total increase for inflation on hydro to 11.5%. For gas, we've included 6.7% based on estimates, and at this time we're forecasting no increase in our water rates. Personnel increases included in the budget are based on approved collective agreements. In the case of agreements that are expiring during 2011, we have provided an amount in there for reasonable settlements. Our benefit costs are increasing 8% based on rate increases from our benefit carrier. In addition to that, OMERS in 2010 announced a rate increase for both employers and employees of 1% in 2011, 1% 2012, and 0.9% in 2013. This brings the total increase in our benefit costs to 8.9%. The budget also includes 13.5 gapped positions in our Planning and Development Commission programs, Planning, Building, and Development Engineering. The 2011 budget also included 13.5 positions that were gapped, and based on revenue forecast, those positions are remaining gapped. It provides savings in our personnel costs of $1.1 million. As well, the 2011 budget included $1.7 million in tax stabilization funding, and that was put in as a temporary measure to sort of cushion the impact of the reduced development revenues within our Planning and Development Commission. Because this was always considered temporary, it has been removed from the 2012 base budget. The 2012 forecasted budget provides only for the maintenance of existing services. It does not include any service enhancements or new initiatives. The budget includes the cost increases that I talked about on the previous slides. As well, it assumes 1.5% in new assessment growth. Based on assessment information received to date from MPAC, as well as our billing activity over the past 2 years, staff feel this is a reasonable estimate. Final growth numbers will not be available until December. However, when we bring the budget to the Budget Committee in November, we should have a fairly good idea of what our growth for 2012 will be. As I mentioned earlier, the base budget includes the operating impacts resulting from completed capital projects. The 2012 budget includes the costs associated with the opening of QE Park Community Centre, as well as a new library branch in Bronte, the annualized impact of the new transit facility, which recently opened, and the impact of maintaining new roads, sidewalks, and parks. In total, this adds $3.3 million to our base for 2012. The capital levy provides a significant source of funding for our capital forecast and represents municipal best practice. The town has a policy of adding 1% to the tax rate each year to increase funding available for infrastructure renewal. An additional $250,000 has been included in the base budget for increased funding for our hot mix paving, and that was approved by Council a couple of years ago. As well, the budget includes the local infrastructure levy, which represents the funding available from the phase-out of the GTA pooling. The tax room is shared by the region and the local municipalities and provides a significant source of funding for our capital budget. It has no impact on the taxpayer, as it is just a tax shift from the region to the town. This slide is a little bit difficult to read, but based on the assumptions that I've outlined, the town's base budget increase is currently 8%. This chart provides a high-level summary of the impact of the various components and is meant to supplement the program-based budgeting information that's included in the report in your agenda. And as the chart shows, the town's base budget increase, including inflation, adjustments to revenue, and transfers to and from reserves, is approximately 5%. Assessment growth of 1.5% reduces this down to 3.5%. When we add in the 1% capital levy and the increased funding for hot mix paving, it adds an extra 1.2%, bringing the increase to 4.7%. The impacts of the completed capital projects and the local infrastructure levy bring the increase to 8%. And again, the infrastructure levy, while it adds 0.93% to the town's budget, there's a corresponding reduction in the region's budget. The region of Halton will be presenting their 2012 budget forecast report in early July. Based on information that was included in their 2011 budget documents, they were estimating an increase of 2.8% for 2012. And assuming no increase in education rates, as has been the case over the past several years, The total tax impact for Oakville residents is 4.1%. This slide outlines the 2013 and 2014 forecasted increases. Both increases are shown before growth and do not assume any new services or service enhancements. The budget forecast report that's included in your agenda provides information by program area of the increases in budgets for 2013 and 14. Currently, the 2013 increase is projected at 6.7% and 2014 at 5.2%. As we move through the process, growth assumptions for these years will be developed, and of course, any assessment growth will reduce the overall increase. As part of the budget process, staff will be updating these forecasts. There were several recommendations approved by the 2011 Budget Committee and subsequently by Council that impact the 2012 budget. The first, that staff be requested to attempt to achieve a 10% reduction of printing each year, and secondly, that staff be directed to prepare the 2012 to 2014 budgets with the total property tax increases in line with inflation, and that the reduction options not accepted by the 2011 Budget Committee not be proposed by staff as potential reduction options during future budget preparations. And finally, that staff be requested to review options to reduce printing costs within the corporation. In addition to the resolutions, there were two requests for reports. The first, that staff be requested to report on options to establish a citizens forum on the annual budget process for consideration and implementation in time for the 2012 budget process. And secondly, that staff be requested to report on the issue of the distribution of advertising purchases between the Oakville Beaver and North Oakville Today newspapers, and further that staff provide information in the report on both statutory and non-statutory advertising placement and the regulations applicable thereto. Both of these reports will be brought to the Budget Committee in the fall. And I'll talk a little bit about the other recommendations shortly. Probably the most significant resolution affecting the 2012 budget is the direction to prepare the 2012 to 2014 budgets with total property tax increases in line with inflation. Inflation is currently running slightly above 3%, and I think in May it was 3.3%. The Bank of Canada is forecasting this rate to drop to 2% by the middle of 2012. As well, the Composite Construction Index for Ontario is currently at 2.7% year over year, and the year over year construction index for development charges was 1.6%. Core inflation for 2012 is being forecast at approximately 1.9%. Many of the components of CPI do not reflect the cost of materials, supplies, contracted services, or personnel costs applicable to municipalities. To assist staff in developing the 2012 budget in line with inflation, a municipal inflation index was developed based on inflationary pressures in the town's budget. The town's expenditures were broken down by their share of the budget. The inflation factors for each component were then weighted by the percentage share they comprise of the total gross expenditures. Because salaries and wages comprise 41.5% of our budget, and that is excluding benefits, to ensure the index accurately reflects inflationary pressures on wages felt across the province, and not just the town, the provincial wage increase average for the first quarter of 2011 was used in the index, and based on trends for the first quarter, the average wage increase across the province has been 2.2%. Based on the weighted average of the town's expenditures, inflation is expected to be in the 2.7% range. The town's overall increase is currently projected to be 4.1%. To bring the increase in line with the budget guideline of inflation for the overall tax impact, the total increase in the total increase needs to be capped at 2.7%. This will require reductions in the town's budget of 3.7% to bring the town's increase down to 4.3%, and this slide just shows the impact of that. This chart shows the dollar impact of the reductions required to bring the town's increase down to 4.3%. To achieve a town increase of 4.3%, approximately $5 million will need to be eliminated from the budget. To achieve reductions of this magnitude will require significant changes to the town's current service levels. The executive management team will be meeting in early July to determine the budget strategy. Council's strategic priorities and the results of the citizen survey will be used to guide this strategy. Departments will be developing their budgets with the constraints of this year's budget in mind. The staff recommended budget will be prepared to meet the council-approved guideline. The measures taken to bring the budget in line with inflation will be identified for council to assist in the review process. In order to meet a target approval date of December 5th, 2011, staff are proposing the following budget timelines. The staff development of the budget will take place during July and August, with the executive management team review taking place in September. During October, the budget documents will be prepared, and the presentation of the budget discussion document and the overview to the Budget Committee is tentatively targeted for November 7th, 2011. 2 meetings are being planned for the Budget Committee review of program budgets, at which time the Commissioners will outline the programs under their responsibility, and those meetings have been tentatively scheduled for November 10th and 15th. Public delegations and deliberations, 3 meetings. The delegations would take place November 22nd and 23rd, with deliberations on November 29th. And again, target approval is December 5th, 2011. These meeting dates will depend on people's availability. That ends my presentation for this afternoon, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions, members of the committee? Councillor Elgar.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm getting a number of questions regarding the transit and the buses running, well, never mind capacity, they're saying almost empty. And will staff be looking at that to see whether there will be some trimming of that budget going forward? Is that the plan?
All budgets will be looked at, including transit.
All budgets?
Absolutely.
Okay. When I look at your slide, it's slide number 10, the 2013-2014 forecast. No, that's wrong. Sorry. It's the municipal inflation index, and it's at slide number 14. Is it possible you could put the numbers?
Certainly, I can do that for you.
With the percentages too, but the numbers also to show just the size of it?
Sure, I can do that for you, no problem.
Thank you. There's a couple more. So right now, if you don't do anything different, you need bottom line
8%.
8%.
8%.
So you have to drop from 8 down to 4.1.
4.3.
4.3 in order to get down to the inflationary rate, which was the direction you were given.
That's correct.
Do you see any problems with that?
I think it will be difficult. EMT is going to spend a fair bit of time in July coming up with a budget strategy. It will take more than just departments looking at individual program line items. We've done that over the past couple of years and come up with efficiencies. It's going to take a larger strategy.
My concern is that sometimes councillors, and I'm seeing it in a lot of municipalities, and there's an awful lot of short-term decisions made where infrastructure gets tanks, which is what was happening here prior to 2006 with regard to the hot mix paving program and things like that, where staff showed us a slide and with a graph, and it looked like we were just on a downhill slide unless we started kicking in more money, which we have started to do. And the roads are a huge issue with in Oakville. And you're reading about infrastructure, where everybody's in terrible shape. Will you be able to present something to us to show us the shape we were in and where we're going with our budgets? Because I know it's hurt us a little bit, but I have to say in the long run, it's a smart thing for the town. But like in the presentation, will that be coming back to us?
Absolutely, we can include that.
Okay, I would appreciate that.
I think Mr. Green has some further comments.
Excuse me. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think one thing that you will see coming back from your staff is the implications of any budget reduction or any budget addition, so that we know what those short-term, long-term, mid-term issues are. To do otherwise would be irresponsible. So you will be seeing those, the implications of such. In some cases, some short-term strategies may in fact be worth it to it. Other times you'll look at it. So we'll make sure that you have that full information in your decision making.
Appreciate that. The other one that jumps out, and and I just wanted to get it sized, it's our insurance rates. These have been jumping up at a rapid rate for the last few years, and I'm wondering should we be looking at a different insurance company also? Because these numbers that 9% is what they're saying now, but it's been around that for the last 4 years, I believe. It seems to have taken off, and I'm wondering what the reasoning is for that.
It is. The preliminary numbers they gave us were closer to 11%, and we have pushed them back down to 9%. We could do some analysis on that to show you what insurance rates are like across municipalities. I don't think it's unique to Oakville that the insurance costs are rising. They are based on experience as well, so that may be part of the issue.
Mr. Lalonde?
Go ahead.
Just to add to what Nancy has told you, we did go to RFP. I'm not sure at this time of the actual date that the contract closes, but we can bring that for you during the budget process. And as Nancy has said, our rates are competitive with other municipalities, but municipal insurance is expensive. So we'll bring you those two pieces of information.
I'd like to thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing what you come back with in the fall. I know it's this idea, nobody wants any increase at all, but nobody wants roads with potholes all over either, and infrastructure that we want to make sure we don't do the short-term gain for long-term pain. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Dawoff.
Thank you very much for this. I have a few questions. One has to do with the inclusion of the 1% increase for capital and the increase in hot mix paving. And we include that in our overall increase to bring us up to the 8%. I see that more as saving for a rainy day. I mean, you're putting it into your bank account to save for a new roof versus running your household. And I'm not quite sure when we're looking at keeping it to the rate of inflation why we wouldn't or couldn't exclude those two items. I mean, I understand, I know that it all comes out of people's pockets, but it's not running the town itself. It's putting it away for capital expenditures. So I don't know if some consideration could be given to excluding that, or whether that's counter to the direction you got from council.
It has been town policy for quite a few years, but it is not, that 1% is not put away for a rainy day. It is actually spent every year on our capital program. So we use that funding. So when we present the capital budget to you as part of the 2012 budget, that 1% levy, those dollars are actually used for infrastructure renewal in our budget. They're not being put into reserves for the future.
Okay, I guess I didn't word it correctly, but they're not being used for our overall operating costs. They're being used for capital.
To maintain our existing infrastructure.
Okay. So again, I go back to the new roof because it's going to be needed at some point, and if you buy it in 2011, it okay,
go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think based on the way the town has been budgeting, that is certainly a decision the Budget Committee may want to look at when it begins to examine exactly what it wants to include as that inflationary rate. But if you look at the way we've budgeted in the past and the budget direction given, that is an item that currently is included as part of that overall increase. So for us to have made that change unilaterally as staff, then we would not be honoring the budget direction. So we've given it to you as our standard budgeting. This is how it's been budgeted for many years. This was the resolution passed by the previous Budget Committee, so we've brought it back to you in that same context. But when you look at the implications of the various, you may have to redefine exactly what you mean by inflation. And yours is a good example of that.
The other one had two other areas. One is the format of what we present in the two areas, the executive summary and the budget reduction options. And I wonder if we could, particularly when they have budget reduction options, if we could put them in plain language as opposed to town language. We all know what the hot mix paving program is, but Joe Smith on the street may not know exactly what we mean by that. And the other, the executive summary doesn't include a lot of concise financial information, and I don't think residents should have to go to a 400-page book to get the background for what the town is doing. And I don't want to get into all the details right now, and I'd be happy to work with the budget chair on that, but I'd just like to see something that's more readable for people to go for information. Then the last one may be more difficult. You've mentioned that you're going to bring back the report on the Citizens Task Force to the Budget Committee, which will be November. Is that correct?
Probably before then. I would say probably September.
I'd really like to see us start consultation earlier rather than cramming it all in November. I know there won't be specific recommendations that can be given to the public beforehand, but just to get a general sense of where people are comfortable with cuts and where they're not could certainly be started in a more general discussion in the fall prior to the budget actually being presented, to get a sense of where residents feel cuts may be able to be made.
Mayor Burton, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly do hope that every member of council will have already begun consulting with their residents, whether they have associations of residents or not, with regard to guidance on the budget. And I look forward to staff's development, the development by staff of their proposals later this year.
Okay.
Anything else? Any other members of council? Councillor Lapworth, did you have a question, comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad Councillor Elgar raised the point about the insurance premiums. Both he and I put a few years in at Bell Canada, and they self-insured some of their vehicles and so on. But, for example, the employee benefit program and other insurance programs, at what point in time should we be self-insuring, if it's permitted?
We do self-insure for insurance purposes. So we have a self-insurance program.
Is that for everything?
No. Yeah, benefits, workers' compensation. And
To you, Mr. Chairman, certainly some of the major areas was examined about 5 or 6 years ago when we actually moved into more self-insurance. One of the areas, though, that we're not self-insured is, in fact, liability insurance. We have a very high deductible, which is to some degree self-insuring yourself against the smaller claims. But on the larger claims, you know, we'd have to rely on external purchase liability. But we have, that was a subject of a review. Actually, Michelle Seguin, so I'm going back probably more in the 8 to 9 years that we looked at all the various insurance. And we did have a discussion about a year ago on that same item. We felt the principles that the town entered into for insurance still made sense the way we're applying them. So only where you have, perhaps it may be a low probability, but a high exposure to risk, those are the areas that we generally buy insurance. But insurance is, I mean, not just municipal insurance. I mean, my policy just came up about 4 weeks ago. And what was interesting, they told me it was only a 2% increase in insurance rates. However, when you read, I also had all of my limits reduced down significantly. So it's like buying a jar of food. I'll charge you exactly the same for a smaller jar. So insurance is happening in all of our lives, personally, corporately, private, and public sector. But it doesn't stop us from shopping around.
Thank you very much.
Any others? Councillor Demuth, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I forgot to ask this previously. The new hospital, in the last budget, it mentioned 2012 there would be some options coming forward to us. Right now, interest rates are at the lowest level they've been, that I can ever remember them being, actually. So I wonder if there's any consideration to bringing that forward. I know we're looking at other options to pay for that, but I just wondered if that's been given some consideration and if it could be.
Yes, we will be bringing forward a couple of reports. There's the whole how do you pay for it issue that will at least be considered in this budget, and how it gets presented remains to be seen. But we did negotiate with Infrastructure Ontario a very comprehensive agreement which structures the payments that we would be making for our local share across the 30-year life of the hospital, and it is correlated to expected or anticipated growth in the town, so that the payments for the hospital get sort of fairly distributed across the population that's there now and the population that will enjoy the hospital in the future. And we negotiated that, and we would like to lock those arrangements in. So that would require two steps that we'll be bringing forward to council. One is to pass a bylaw to allow us to conclude these negotiations with Infrastructure Ontario, and then the actual term sheet will be coming forward for your consideration this fall.
And just to add to that, Mr. Chairman, though, one of the things, of course, we want to do is maintain absolute flexibility. So we will look at a range of options, some of them which may take some action by council, but the decision actually how you do the financing makes sense to leave it towards that last date. You're looking at a 2015 before that money is required. So we'll be looking at various strategies and the appropriate time to implement them. But that final decision as to how it will be financed is probably better to be made later than sooner, because one, you'll know the quantum. Two, there may be other opportunities that come along.
Any others? Councillor Elgar?
Yeah, and it's just a question regarding construction costs. You've got an inflation rate of 2.7%. And I just, when you come back, could you show us what the construction inflation costs have been over the last, say, 5 years? Because certainly, at the region, it seems whenever we do a capital construction project, I've never seen one that's just gone up 2.7% due to inflationary. It's always steel has gone up 7 or 10%, and concrete the same, and asphalt also, an oil-based product. And I'm just wondering whether that percentage, it makes us look good, but maybe not very accurate. And I'm a little concerned about that low percentage. I like it, but I'm very concerned that may be a little bit low based on what I'm seeing happen in reality.
We will bring that back for you. That is the year-over-year construction index for Ontario that I've quoted there. But we'll look at what's actually happened in our capital budget.
Any other questions? Could I just have you comment on the development charge review that we're doing, and to what degree this committee will be asked to look at any of that material?
The RFP for the development charge background study is currently out on the street. I believe it closes the end of June, and there's a steering committee that will go through the process of choosing. The budget committee will provide overview to the steering committee for the process, and I'm not sure if Gord, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so we've set up internally a steering committee that's comprised of the 4 commissioners, the CAO, legal, and Nancy, and we are looking to this committee to provide oversight to the major decisions that are involved in the establishment of the DC, the new DC bylaw. We would like to have council. We would like to have council's advice as we move from where we are right now forward to a bylaw before the end of 2012, which is likely to be another controversial project, and we think that we would benefit from ongoing participation from this committee in working through that.
Do we need to give you direction or request a report on DCs, or can we expect that to come back to the committee at the appropriate time, and we'll schedule a meeting dealing with the DCs when it's appropriate?
I think you can expect us to bring forward a report at the appropriate time, and we will schedule extra meetings for that process as needed.
Okay. Any other questions? Mayor Burton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If there are no other questions, I'll give you a motion for the recommendation that the 2012 budget directions and 13 and 14 budget forecasts be received.
Okay. Any comments further? Then all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. There are no confidential discussion items, and we are therefore adjourned. Thank you, everybody.